The hum of the ISS Resolute's massive engines reverberated through the ship's steel corridors as the Galactic Commandos assembled in the main training hall. Bright artificial light gleamed off their armor, sleek, polished, and equipped with tech far beyond Earth's current capabilities. Surrounding them, a crowd of Concordia personnel and Earth's contingent of U.S. Marines looked on, many with barely concealed skepticism. Sergeant Dean Carter leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, watching the spectacle with an unreadable expression. His unit, clad in simple yet effective tactical gear, stood behind him in disciplined silence. "Let's see what Earth's so-called elite can do," Commander Velnik of the Galactic Commandos sneered, his voice a low rumble. "Perhaps you'll surprise us and manage not to trip over your primitive boots." Dean smirked, his lips quirking just enough to show he'd heard but wouldn't rise to the bait. "We'll try to keep up," he said lightly, his tone devoid of the deference Velnik clearly expected. The commandos began their demonstration, showcasing their advanced weaponry and synchronized drills. Blaster fire lit up the hall as their automated drones performed flawless maneuvers, targeting holographic enemies with pinpoint precision. The crowd murmured in appreciation, but Dean noted the subtle flaws. The commandos relied heavily on their tech, with little improvisation or adaptability. "Flashy," muttered Corporal Simmons, standing beside Dean. "Looks more like a light show than combat training." Dean chuckled. "Let them have their moment. Reality tends to hit harder than holograms." Before Simmons could reply, the ship's comm system crackled to life. "Attention all personnel." The captain's voice boomed, urgency sharp in her tone. "Distress signal received from Outpost Epsilon. Unknown hostile forces attacking. All hands to stations. This is not a drill." The training hall erupted into motion. The Galactic Commandos immediately marched out, their movements brisk but mechanical. Dean's Marines exchanged brief, knowing glances before following his lead. "Gear up," Dean ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We're going to work." Minutes later, the Resolute dropped out of hyperspace near Outpost Epsilon. The site outside the ship's observation deck was chaotic. The outpost, a sprawling station nestled near an asteroid field, was under siege. Thraxian raider ships swarmed like locusts, their jagged designs a stark contrast to the sleek Concordia vessels. Explosions dotted the void, casting ominous flickers of light across the Resolute's hull. "Status report," barked Captain Vares, standing on the bridge. "Shields at maximum," replied the tactical officer. "But the Thraxians have some sort of EMP weapon. They're targeting critical systems." Dean and his team arrived on the bridge just as the ship shuddered violently under enemy fire. The Galactic Commandos were already strategizing, their leader issuing clipped commands. "Commander Velnik," Dean said, stepping forward. "What's the plan?" Velnik shot him a disdainful glance. "Stay out of our way, Sergeant. This is no place for amateurs." Dean bit back a retort as the ship jolted again, lights flickering. Amateurs or not, it was clear the commandos weren't prepared for this kind of assault. Suddenly, the Thraxians deployed boarding pods. The Resolute's hull groaned under the impact, and alarms blared as intruders breached the ship. "Boarding parties detected on decks 5, 7, and 10, the security chief reported. "We'll handle deck 5, Velnik declared. Dean leaned toward Captain Vares. "What about the other decks?" The captain hesitated, her confidence visibly wavering. "The Galactic Commandos are spread too thin," Dean finished. "Permission to deploy my team to deck 7. Vares nodded reluctantly. "Granted. Do what you can, Sergeant." Dean's boots pounded against the deck as he led his team toward the breach. The air was tense, the occasional distant blast punctuating the otherwise eerie silence. "All right, listen up," Dean said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "These Thraxians aren't just here to cause trouble, they've got a plan. That means they'll be organized. We'll need to outthink them." "What's the play, Sarge?" Simmons asked. "Keep it simple," Dean replied. "We bottleneck them at the breach point. No fancy tricks, just good old-fashioned Marine grit." They rounded the corner and came face to face with the enemy. The Thraxians were as fearsome as the stories described, hulking, reptilian figures clad in spiked armor, their weapons humming with deadly energy. "Take cover!" Dean shouted, diving behind a bulkhead as the Thraxians opened fire. The Marines returned fire with precision, their disciplined volleys contrasting sharply with the Thraxians' brute force tactics. The corridor filled with the acrid smell of plasma and the sharp crack of gunfire. "Frag out!" Simmons called, tossing a grenade down the corridor. The explosion sent several Thraxians sprawling, clearing a path. Dean motioned his team forward. "Move! Secure the breach!" As they pushed the Thraxians back, Dean's mind worked furiously. The attack was too coordinated for mere piracy. There had to be more to this, and the Galactic Commandos' overconfidence wasn't helping. By the time they secured Deck 7, the Marines were winded but victorious. Dean surveyed the carnage, his expression grim. "Status?" he asked, turning to Simmons. "Breach sealed," Simmons reported. "For now, anyway." Dean nodded. "Good work. Let's regroup and—" A sudden vibration shook the deck beneath them. Dean's comm crackled to life. "Sergeant Carter, report to engineering." Karin's voice came through, clipped and urgent. "There's something you need to see." Dean frowned. "On our way." In engineering, the situation was dire. Karin, a lanky alien with shimmering teal skin, gestured to a console displaying a cascade of red alerts. "The Thraxians didn't just breach, they've compromised our power grid," Karin said. "And there's something else." Dean raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Karin hesitated, then pointed to a schematic of the ship. "This isn't random sabotage. They had help. Someone aboard the Resolute disabled key defenses before the attack." Dean's jaw tightened. "A mole." It explained too much. "Can you trace it?" Karin shook her head. "Not yet. But if we don't restore power, it won't matter. We're sitting ducks." Dean glanced at his team, then back at Karin. "We'll hold the line. You focus on getting those systems back online." Karin hesitated, then nodded. "Don't get yourselves killed." Dean allowed himself a faint smile. "Not part of the plan." As Dean and his team moved out, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. The Galactic Commandos might have the tech, but Earth's survival depended on people like him, those willing to do whatever it took to stand against the odds. And right now, the odds were looking grim. Dean Carter ducked into the Resolute's armory, sweat streaking his face beneath his helmet. His team filed in behind him, their breathing heavy but controlled. The air inside the cramped room carried the tang of oil and ozone from hastily calibrated weapons. "We held Deck 7, Simmons said, leaning against a wall as he reloaded his rifle. "Barely. What's the word from command?" Dean slung his weapon across his chest. "Command's busy with the bridge. The Galactic Commandos are holding Deck 5, or so they say. Meanwhile, Karin's confirmed a mole on board." The Marines stiffened at the news. Private Dawson broke the silence. "A mole? On this ship? That explains a lot." Dean nodded. "They sabotaged key systems. Makes sense now how the Thraxians got this far without raising alarms." "What do we do, Sarge?" Simmons asked. "We do what we've always done," Dean replied. "Adapt, overcome, and make them regret thinking Earth would roll over." The armory door hissed open, and Karin entered, her elongated, teal form casting a shadow across the Marines. She held a datapad in one hand, her expression tense. "Sergeant," she said, her tone clipped, "we've stabilized some power to essential systems, but the main controls are still compromised. Worse, the Thraxians are fortifying their hold on the bridge. Without a coordinated counteroffensive, they'll lock us out completely." "Can you track the mole yet?" Dean asked. Karin shook her head. "Not enough data. Whoever it is, they're clever, erased their tracks. I need more time, but that's a luxury we don't have." "Then we don't wait," Dean said decisively. He stepped toward a tactical display mounted on the armory wall. "We retake the bridge and cut the head off this snake. If we're lucky, We can force the Thraxians to retreat before their reinforcements arrive. Karin raised a brow. You're severely outnumbered. The Galactic Commandos couldn't handle them, and they're better equipped than your team. Dean smiled wryly. Maybe. But we're better at thinking on our feet. Karin sighed. I hope your optimism isn't misplaced. The plan came together quickly. Dean divided his team into 2 units, one to create a diversion and draw Thraxian forces away from the bridge, the other to strike directly at the command center. Karin volunteered to accompany the assault team, her expertise crucial for bypassing the Thraxians' control over the ship's systems. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, Dean briefed the group in hushed tones. Simmons, Dawson, your team hits the lower decks and makes as much noise as possible. Use non-lethal grenades. Don't waste lives unless you have to. Simmons grinned. Copy that, Sarge. We'll give them a light show they won't forget. Dean nodded. The rest of you are with me. We'll take the maintenance shafts to bypass their main patrols. Karin, we'll need you to disable security when we reach the command center. Karin adjusted the strap of her equipment bag, her face unreadable. Just get me there alive. Count on it, Dean said. The diversion team moved first. Moments after they disappeared down a side corridor, distant explosions and the roar of gunfire echoed through the ship. The Thraxians took the bait. The pounding of their heavy boots reverberated through the deck as they rushed toward the noise. Dean's group slipped into a maintenance shaft, the cramped space forcing them to move single file. The sound of metal creaking underfoot kept everyone on edge. I hate these tight spaces, muttered Corporal Ramirez, crawling behind Dean. Feels like a death trap. Better than walking into a firing squad, Dean replied, keeping his voice low. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged near the bridge. The corridor ahead was eerily quiet, the chaos of battle muffled by the heavy doors separating them from their target. Karin knelt by the control panel, her nimble fingers flying across the interface. Sparks flew as she bypassed the Thraxian security lock. This would be easier with the proper tools, she muttered. Welcome to the Marine Corps, Dean said dryly. Karin snorted but said nothing as the final lock disengaged with a hiss. The doors slid open, revealing the command center. It was a battlefield waiting to happen. Consoles and terminals lined the room, and Thraxian guards were stationed at strategic points. In the center stood Commander Zoran, his imposing frame silhouetted against the glow of the ship's primary holographic display. Zoran turned as the doors opened, his reptilian features twisting into a sneer. So, the humans think they can take my bridge? Brave. Foolish, but brave. Dean stepped forward, weapon raised. You've got 2 options, Commander. Leave now, or we make you leave. Zoran laughed, a guttural, menacing sound. Your threats mean nothing. You're outmatched in every way. Dean didn't reply. Instead, he fired the first shot, hitting a Thraxian guard square in the chest. Chaos erupted as his team fanned out, taking cover and returning fire with precision. Karin dove behind a console, her hands already working to disable the Thraxians' control of the ship. Dean and Ramirez provided cover, their shots forcing the guards to stay pinned down. They're dug in! Ramirez shouted over the din. Dean grimaced. Then we dig them out. He lobbed a smoke grenade toward the center of the room. The hiss of the canister was followed by a cloud of thick gray smoke, obscuring visibility. Move! Dean barked. The team surged forward, using the confusion to their advantage. Dean reached Zoran, who towered over him, his claws gleaming in the dim light. You think your primitive tactics can save you? Zoran snarled, lunging at Dean. Dean dodged, slamming the butt of his rifle into the Thraxian's side. No, he said through gritted teeth. But they can make you bleed. The fight was brutal, a clash of brute strength against human grit. Dean's movements were calculated, each step and strike designed to exploit Zoran's overconfidence. Behind them, Karin shouted. I've almost got it! Keep them off me! Dean ducked under Zoran's swing, buying precious seconds. Hurry it up, Karin! I'm working as fast as I can, she snapped. Finally, Karin's console emitted a series of beeps. Done! She cried. The ship's systems are back under our control. The tide turned instantly. Automated defenses sprang to life, targeting the remaining Thraxians. Cut off and outmaneuvered, the invaders began to fall back. Dean turned to Zoran, who was breathing heavily, his confidence shattered. Looks like you're out of options, Commander. Zoran growled but retreated, signaling his forces to withdraw. As the last of the Thraxians fled, Dean turned to his team. Secure the bridge. Simmons, report in. Simmons' voice crackled over the comm. Diversion worked. The Thraxians are scattering. Nice work, Sarge. Dean exhaled, allowing himself a rare moment of relief. Let's finish this. The Resolute's corridors echoed with the faint hum of its now restored systems, a stark contrast to the earlier chaos. Dean Carter leaned against the console in the bridge, catching his breath. His team had secured the area, but the battle was far from over. The Thraxians had retreated, but their ships still loomed outside like wolves circling wounded prey. Karin's fingers flew across the terminal as she reviewed the damage. We've regained basic control, but weapons systems are still offline, she announced, her voice edged with frustration. And the shield generator is barely holding. If they attack again, we're done. Dean straightened, his gaze fixed on the holographic display of the battlefield outside. The Thraxians' fleet had regrouped, their jagged ships forming an ominous perimeter around the Resolute. What's stopping them from finishing us off right now? He asked. Karin glanced up. They're recalibrating after the system disruption, but it won't take long. We have maybe 10 minutes before they come at us with everything they've got. Dean nodded, his mind racing. He turned to his team. All right, listen up. This isn't over. The Thraxians are regrouping, and if we don't act fast, we're sitting ducks. Karin, how long would it take to bring the main weapons back online? Karin frowned, her expression grim. At least 20 minutes, but we don't have that kind of time. The damage is extensive. Then we need another plan, Dean said. His eyes narrowed as he studied the hologram. They're clustered too close to the asteroid field. If we could destabilize one of those big rocks, we might use it as a weapon. Karin blinked. You want to weaponize an asteroid? That's insane. Dean smirked. Welcome to Earth tactics. Can we do it? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Theoretically, yes. If we can detonate something near one of the larger asteroids, the shockwave could push it into their fleet. But we'd need a powerful explosive and someone to set it manually. That's our play, Dean said. He turned to Simmons. Get the explosives ready. We're going on a spacewalk. Minutes later, Dean and his hand-picked team suited up in the Resolute's airlock. The bulky EVA suits were far from ideal for combat, but they offered the protection they needed in the cold vacuum of space. Simmons double-checked the detonator while Ramirez adjusted the explosive charges in his pack. Dean's voice crackled over the comm. Everyone ready? Locked and loaded, Simmons replied. You sure this is going to work, Sarge? Dean tightened his helmet's seal. It has to. Let's move. The airlock hissed open, revealing the black void of space. The asteroid field loomed ahead, massive rocks spinning lazily in the vastness. The Thraxian fleet glinted in the distance, unaware of the humans' bold maneuver. The team pushed off the ship, their thrusters propelling them toward their target. The silence of space was unnerving, broken only by the occasional chatter over the comms. Keep it tight, Dean instructed. We don't need anyone drifting off. As they neared the chosen asteroid, its immense size became apparent. The surface was jagged, pockmarked by countless collisions over millennia. Dean landed first, his boots magnetizing to the surface. He motioned for Simmons and Ramirez to follow. Set the charges here and here, Dean said, pointing to two strategic points. We need maximum force to break it free. As Simmons and Ramirez worked, Karin's voice came through the comm. Dean, you've got company. The Thraxians have launched patrols. They're heading your way. Understood, Dean replied, his jaw tightening. We'll handle it. The first Thraxian patrol ship appeared moments later, its sleek form cutting through the asteroid field with predatory grace. Dean watched it approach, his pulse steady. He gestured to Simmons, who finished placing the last charge, and nodded. "Get ready," Dean said. "Ramirez, cover us." Simmons, on my mark, triggered the decoy flares. The Thraxian ship fired, its plasma rounds streaking toward the humans' position. Dean and his team scattered, using the asteroid's uneven terrain for cover. "Now, Simmons!" Dean shouted. Simmons activated the flares, and bright bursts of light erupted around the asteroid. The Thraxian ship hesitated, its sensors momentarily blinded. Dean seized the opportunity, aiming his rifle at the ship's underbelly. His shot hit a weak point, sending the patrol ship spiraling out of control before it exploded in a fiery blaze. "Nice shot, Sarge," Ramirez said, grinning. "Don't celebrate yet," Dean replied. "There'll be more." With the charges set, the team retreated to a safe distance. Dean checked the detonator, his gloved fingers steady despite the weight of what was at stake. "Karin, are we clear?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "Another patrol is closing in. You need to move now." Dean glanced at his team. "Get back to the Resolute. I'll trigger the explosives." Simmons shook his head. "No way, Sarge. We're not leaving you here." "That's an order," Dean said firmly. "This ship needs you alive. Go." Reluctantly, Simmons and Ramirez activated their thrusters, retreating toward the safety of the Resolute. Dean remained behind, his focus unwavering. The second Thraxian patrol ship appeared just as he pressed the detonator. The charges ignited in a brilliant flash, the asteroid shuddering under the force. Slowly it began to break free, its massive bulk drifting toward the Thraxian fleet. "Dean, get out of there!" Karin shouted. "I'm on it," he replied, pushing off the asteroid with all his strength. The Thraxian patrol ship fired wildly, its shots narrowly missing him as he sped toward the Resolute. Behind him, the asteroid picked up speed, its trajectory perfect. Dean didn't look back as the massive rocks slammed into the Thraxian fleet, the impact creating a blinding explosion that tore through their ships. Dean landed on the Resolute's hull, his heart pounding. Simmons and Ramirez were there to pull him inside, their expressions a mix of relief and admiration. "You're insane, Sarge," Simmons said, clapping him on the back. "Maybe," Dean replied, pulling off his helmet. "But it worked." Karin's voice crackled over the comm. "The Thraxians are retreating. Whatever's left of their fleet is scrambling to jump out of the system." Dean allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Let them run." As the team made their way back to the bridge, the mood was tense but hopeful. The Resolute had survived against impossible odds, and Earth's Marines had proven their worth in a galaxy that had doubted them. Dean stood at the center of the bridge, looking out at the stars. The battle was over, but the war for respect and survival had only just begun.